I just want to say thank you. So many people do so much that we could have this place and do what we're doing here. And if you are thinking to yourself, "Well, I'm not doing much. I just came here for some reason," but that's a lot too. So anyway, thank you. As you might know, I spent a couple weeks in Oregon. Raisel and I both were in Oregon. We were doing a little bit different things. And what I was doing was like a little pilgrimage, little self-directed Zen temple tour. The I-5 corridor in Oregon has 7 Zen centers. Actually, 8. I missed one. I did miss one. I'll have to go back. And in most of them I knew, I already knew the teacher or, somebody, and so I got to have tea or dinner and spend time talking shop. I got to Zen shop many, many, many hours. It seems to be endlessly fun for people who do this thing. You never get tired of talking shop. And mostly getting to see different sanghas in action and see how different people do things. And it's all recognizably it's all recognizably Zen practice, but each sangha with some different arrangements. So it's really fun, and I'll be sort of digesting and learning from that for some time to come, and occasionally suggesting with my elders and advisors about little things we might want to adopt that I saw other places or think about, be informed by. One of the conversations, though, which I felt a little awkward for a minute, but then I ended up really appreciating, is I had dinner with a colleague quite senior to me, and we're in this Portland hip pizza place, and he looks at me with pretty good Zen eyes and says, "What's your vow?" And I went, practice, And he had a clear sort of sense of his own vow, and so it sort of helped me. I didn't know if I said a few things that maybe were coherent to him, but later I thought about it. And I'm also grateful that when I get tongue-tied with a teacher, I don't feel so embarrassed anymore. I'm like, oh well. I actually fought back a little bit. I said, "Hey, is this dinner or Dokusan? What are we doing?" And he said, "Oh, I just like to pry." And then he kept at it. What are you doing? And I'd say something and say, "Well, why? What's that mean?" So it made me realize that I guess my vow is that we can have a place where 2 really important things can be happening together, which I've come to think of as 2 paths that are braided together. And I call these 2 paths the path of healing and the path of transformation. So, we all need healing, that's for sure. We're all wounded and traumatized in various ways. And this is not some new invention of trauma psychology, right? The Buddha figured this out, we've always known this. That to be a living person in the context of being a living person with all of the things that involves challenge, trauma, pain, and disaster, with joy, love, connection, and everything, right? Everything. But we definitely need healing. And so I hope that our place of practice here is a place of healing, where people feel seen and heard and appreciated, maybe appropriately left alone when that's what's needed, right? That when they go to the teachers asking for healing and reassurance, we find some ways to support that possibility, largely by helping people see that they have all this within them. We have what we need within us to heal. It's not something we have to run around and get. But we also need not just healing, because in the path of healing, it can be limiting without the path of transformation. Because the path of transformation is the path of seeing seeing life and reality in a radically different way. A way that's free, a way that's not caught by our conditioning and our preferences and our patterns, a way that's beyond anything we can think about or figure out or talk about, but a real thing, a real feeling, a real way. And Zen's magic has always been its incredible focus and depth in this path of transformation. Like, that's the gig, you know. And that's why Zen Buddhism caught on so strongly amongst a small number of people, but in a very strong way, when Western convert Zen Buddhists started practicing in the 60s and 70s. But whenever I tell that story, I want to remind myself that Zen Buddhism has been here as long as Japanese immigrants have been here. It's not an invention of the 50s or the 60s or the hippies or something like that. But in that period, Westernized Americans started saying, wow, they've got something important over there. I want to know about that. And innovative teachers found ways to include these scruffy young Americans. The path of transformation is about realizing in a fundamental way that actually we're not wounded after all. That the idea of woundedness is transitory and empty and as solid as a cloud is something, it's something, and it's powerful, but it's not solid in that way. The path of transformation is the path of total freedom. And those early Zen stories about people popping off into enlightenment, of course, are very exciting. But now we know it's not just practicing really hard till you pop off into enlightenment. It's a long journey with ups and downs and lefts and rights, and it has to be intertwined with the path of healing. So I realize that's kind of my hope for us, that we do both. Transformation without healing can be harsh and unforgiving, uncompromising, and doesn't work for a lot of people. It can be misinterpreted as cruel or demeaning, or done a little bit unskillfully, and then maybe it is cruel and demeaning. The path of transformation is about turning our life around, you know, seeing everything in a new way. And for all this to work, we have to be really committed, you know. Really committed to taking responsibility for our own minds. I think that's really the essential ingredient in both paths, taking responsibility for our own minds. Which is not to say anything's our fault. That's a different idea. That would just be blaming ourselves. But to recognize that we are at the crux of our life. Exactly, only me, only you. And we are the only ones who can practice right here and right now. And if we want to heal and transform, it's up to us, actually. Luckily, there's a lot of support, and I hope there's a lot of support here, and a lot of support in the universe for this. And the tricky thing is to recognize which of these paths is most helpful at any one moment. And sometimes it's not what we think at first, you know. We get ruffled or frustrated or feel whatevered, you know, fill in the blank. Sometimes we just need somebody to apologize, we need to explain what we need to have a process, we need healing. Absolutely. Sometimes that's just continuing the same old stuff forever, right? There never will be a time when everybody treats you the way that part of you wants to be treated. It's never going to happen. I was just talking to somebody about this in a long relationship, right? So we also need to invite the possibility of transformation in that moment. Can I take in this energy, this feeling, see what it really is about, and release it again? Do I need to straighten anybody out? Do I need to solve anything? Do I need a process? Or can I just be and feel what I feel, and it's okay. So it all gets tricky and subtle, and I'm sure all of us, well, none of us will do this right exactly, but I just want to bring up this idea. I hope it's helpful. The path of healing and the path of transformation. And probably at different points in our life and our practice sort of arc, one of these or the other is more important, and that may shift back and forth, actually. That's sometimes very upsetting to people. I've known people like this, actually. They're gung-ho on the path of transformation, and they practice so hard, and they feel so whatever, clear and light, and then some deep conditioning gets triggered, and they're a sobbing mess, you know. Some of them end up quitting the practice, actually. I knew somebody like that. Because, like, what? You know? This thing doesn't work? But then you got to pivot, you know, to healing, to deep healing. And forget all that, you know. Forget about transformation. Get nurtured, you know. Anyway. So that's one little note kind of stemming from my Oregon pilgrimage, and I'll think of other things maybe later on. And I want to continue now with the project that we've been embarking on Wednesday nights this year to unpack the chant book, which seems to have a lot of stuff packed into it for a slim little volume, you know. And Kanho Chris was working on this most recently with 4 wonderful talks. Thank you so much, Chris. On the Song of the Jewel Mirror Samadhi. I got to see 1 or 2 and listen to the others on the website. I just so appreciated that, the sense that that you experienced, I'm sure, of just like entering the space of that poem, you know, just being right in the middle of it. And what exactly this particular metaphor or that image means, does it matter? No, it turns out. And yes, it turns out, yes. And no, and I think you probably all felt something, you know, something important in that process. And I know Chris loves that sutra, that song. And it's all the Zen poems are one way or the other expressions, right, of the landscape of transformation, you know. So it's getting familiar with that landscape is a big part of the process of the path of transformation. It's not like a technique thing, you know, transformation. It's about immersion and familiarity and trust, learning to trust that which we don't understand in that way that the mind tries to understand. So that's great. And I rattled on for 7 talks on the Heart Sutra before that. And right after the Heart Sutra, which we just chanted, we chant a different sounding text. Have you noticed how different the hymn to the Perfection of Wisdom sounds from the Heart Sutra and all the other stuff? It's more like a prayer all of a sudden. So I want to share a little bit about the hymn to the Perfection of Wisdom that we just got to chant. And actually, if someone can hand me a chant book, let's chant it again too, just to have it kind of front of our minds. Maybe that's probably in my head too, Mari. If it's thanks. Oh. Amen. Hymn to the perfection of wisdom. Homage to the perfection of wisdom, the lovely, the holy, the perfection of wisdom gives light. Unstained, the entire world cannot stain her. She is the source of light, and from everyone in the triple world she removes darkness. Most excellent are her works. She brings light so that all fear and distress may be forsaken, and disperses the gloom and darkness of delusion. She herself is an organ of vision. She has a clear knowledge of the Om being of all dharmas, for she does not stray away from it. The perfection of wisdom of the Buddhas that's in motion, the wheel of Dharma. Isn't that lovely, you know? Just lovely. And most of it's pretty understandable, you know. A few parts are a little bit obscure. So this is the beginning of a chapter of a long sutra on the perfection of wisdom, on the Prajnaparamita. So as you might have figured out by now, this Prajnaparamita stuff is really important in our lineage. We talked about it all through our series on the 6 paramitas and on Sundays all year. It's the sixth one that kind of makes all of them go, you know. And we chant the Heart Sutra every week, and we dedicate pretty much everything with the line Maha Prajna Paramita. So Maha just means great. So we're just like constantly like great Paramita, great Paramita. That's exactly what we're saying actually. So the Prajna Paramita literature is emerged around 100 or 200 before the Common Era, as a way of really exploring, you know, this transformational quality of the teachings, the wisdom that goes beyond wisdom. And the Indian Buddhist pundits at the time were writers, you know, were poets, and they explored this in writing with great enthusiasm. And we think the first text that they wrote, and who knows if it was one author or many authors, and of course, like all of the Buddhist texts that were written later, they always claim they were written by the Buddha, which religiously is absolutely true. Historically, not so much. Right? So the first one we think they wrote is this one, the Prajnaparamita, in 8,000 lines. That's how they named them, just by word count, you know. But you probably wouldn't sell a lot of novels. It was like a novel in 32,552 words, you know. That's how they titled these, you know. Nothing about the topic. Well, the topic is the perfection of wisdom. And then after doing one that's 8,000 lines long, and not exactly lines, 8,000 verses long, they did one that's 25,000 verses long, and one that's 100,000 verses long, great big thing. And there was a scholar in the 50s and 60s. He was actually born in Germany and lived in England and ended up in America, named Edward Kanza. And he, for some reason, fell in love with this literature in Sanskrit, and he translated like almost all of it, like this incredible scholarly feat. And I know people who knew him, who had him as their professor when they were young and in college. And this is translated by that particular person. So it's just interesting to me how these things kind of get to a new culture. And it's just basically a long meditation on what it would be if we really felt and realized the empty nature of all that is. The way things aren't separate, they aren't like our concepts make them seem. They're much more open and fluid and free than any of that. And you know, they're wonderful and kind of challenging to read, and you know, and you can imagine trying to read 100,000 verses on this. I have not done that, but I've read most of this one. And it mostly is dialogue. So I want to read you just kind of a typical little section of it, and then I'll tell you about the part that led to our little hymn here, and why I think our little hymn is important. What did I want to read to you? I'm kind of off script here. Yeah. So it's mostly a dialogue between the Buddha and two of his disciples, Subhuti and Shariputra. And you might recall, maybe, if you were around then, when we were talking about the Heart Sutra, there's a little frame story that tells us, that's not in our chant book, a little frame story that tells us it too is a dialogue. Although in this case, the Buddha inspires the dialogue from meditation, and it's a dialogue between Shariputra, one of these same two monks, and Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. And that's kind of unique. Most of the Bodhisattva of compassion doesn't show up in these other ones, as far as I know. But the Buddha and his two disciples do show up. So here's a little sort of sample. Just let this wash over you and don't try too hard to figure anything out. In this particular moment, actually, the Buddha's there, and Subhuti is talking, and a god shows up to join the dialogue named Sakra. So Subhuti's talking to Sakra. Subhuti then said to Sakra, "Now, listen and attend well. I will teach you how a bodhisattva should stand in perfect wisdom. Through standing in emptiness should he stand in perfect wisdom. Armed with the great armor, the Bodhisattva should so develop that she does not take her stand on any of these, not on form, not on feeling, not on perception, not on impulses, consciousness. Does that sound familiar? Not on eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, not on forms, smells, taste, touch, touchables, mind objects, not on eye consciousness, etc., until we come to not on mind consciousness, etc., until we come to not on the elements, i.e. earth, water, fire, wind, ether consciousness, not on the pillars of mindfulness, right efforts or roads to psychic power, faculties, powers, limbs of enlightenment. This is all parts of Buddhism. Limbs of the path, not on the fruits of the stream winner, the once returner, the never returner, or arhatship, not on partake Buddhahood, nor on Buddhahood. She should not take her stand on the idea that this is form, this is feeling, etc. She should not take her stand on the idea that form is permanent or impermanent, or that form is easeful or suffering, or that form is the self or not the self, or that form is lovely or repulsive, or that form is empty or apprehended as something. He should not take his stand on the notion that the fruits of the holy life derive their dignity from the unconditioned. No, Sakra. The Bodhisattva should stand only in perfect wisdom, and only stand in emptiness. Got it? So it goes on like this for many, many, many pages, and lots of negation, like you heard, and language like we heard some time ago when we were studying the Diamond Sutra is in here too. Because anyway, after they got to their peak, and the longest one we're aware of, there may be others that were lost, of 100,000 verses of this kind of stuff, exploring emptiness, exploring Prajnaparamita, then they must have realized, man, nobody's going to read these. So they wrote shorter ones. They wrote the Diamond Sutra and they wrote the Heart Sutra, which aren't exactly in verses, but it'd be more or less going down from 100,000 to like 530 or something like that. And anyway, in one of the chapters of this text, chapter 7, after lots and lots of tangled sort of logic of emptiness like that, on and on and on, suddenly we break into praise. And we have the text that was edited a little bit to make our little chant here, this hymn. So it's a prayer, really. It's a prayer that we will really understand emptiness, really love wisdom. And to make the prayer really work as a prayer, Prajnaparamita can also be personified. And usually personified as a she. Maybe a he or a they, I don't know, but the examples I know of are all of a she. And this being, who is not exactly a person, and not exactly clear if they would be called a bodhisattva, but an emanation, an emanation of wisdom in female form, which gives us something to focus on, right? Someone to be with, and someone to venerate and love. And as you heard there, that this being, this example, this emanation of wisdom, is lovely, is holy, gives light, and can't be blemished. Doesn't have any faults. Doesn't get caught by anything. And like the Bodhisattva of compassion, and there's a close connection here for sure. Her whole deal is to bring light and healing and to remove darkness. You just hear the emphasis is on wisdom, whereas with Avalokiteshvara, Kanon, Kanzeon, the emphasis is compassion. And she does this so that we'll be free from fear and free from darkness. And the key line in our little hymn is, she has a clear knowledge of the own being of all dharmas, for she does not stray away from it. So own being is a technical term, meaning what's the sort of essence of things? What's the nature of things? What's their sort of selfness? And, of course, she knows that the own being of all dharmas is empty. There's nothing solid to hold on to. There's nothing we can grasp, nothing we can make permanent, It only has a shifting kaleidoscope of realities and textures and flavors as conditions change and as everything co-arises according to the great cosmic wheel of karma, That things are not real, but they're just not real in that fixed way we tend to think they are, which then leads us to be upset when they change, such as being alive, for instance, right? That's going to change. So she can see that, and the beautiful part here is where it says, for she does not stray away from it. So this doesn't freak her out, She's comfortable and content with the way things actually are. And because of that, she can set in motion the wheel of Dharma, which has been turning since the beginning of time, so that we can all practice. So this is a lovely addition. I'm so glad we chant this usually after the Heart Sutra, because it helps us see this isn't just stuff to think about or figure out. These are teachings to love, teachings to hold close, teachings to appreciate in our bones, and to sing to sing for. So I love that we kind of sing it, and people can put our hands in Gasho and sing it. I was just visiting a college class today, actually, a religious poetry class at Western. And it was mostly dialogue. The students were asking questions. As I've experienced before, undergraduates are getting younger every year. Every time I go up there, they're younger. Why is that? It's weird. What if it gets to where they haven't been born yet? Who's going to be at the university? I was actually at one point telling them about a study that was published in the year 2000, back when the iPhone was invented, and kind of looked around like, yeah, way back before the iPhone. And I almost said, remember that? And I said, wait a minute. None of you were born in the year 2000. Anyway, that's a side affair. That's cute. So much going on up there. Oh my gosh, Wonderful, amazing things are happening on campus all the time. And I well remember being a college student and unable to appreciate or take much of it in, but anyway. So anyway, one student asked me, tell me, how does prayer work in your tradition? How does prayer work? Maybe he was a Christian, I don't know, I didn't ask. And I thought, what an interesting coincidence. I was going to talk about prayer tonight. So we don't often use the word prayer, strongly associated with the Judeo-Christian tradition, in talking about religion in English anyway. And I do know that some of us have been wounded by some of those traditions, and so it's not necessarily a simple thing to think about prayer or bring up the word prayer. But maybe we can reclaim prayer a little bit, just like we can reclaim words like faith and grace, or at least share, they can share. Because I think we need this element, whether the word prayer is right, or the word evoke, or the word dedicate, or the word, devote, But there needs to be a heart element to the path of healing, for sure. Like it's obvious in the path of healing, right? That's all about the heart. But there's a heart element in the path of transformation, too. A veneration for our good fortune, and a deep appreciation for our good fortune to have born a person, a human, and found out about the Dharma, and that there's this incredible body of teachings and practices that can help us, and these communities that have continuously kept this alive, warm hand to warm hand, for 2,600 years or more. So it's also great that we can pray to Prajnaparamita, which is what that hymn actually says is, It'd just be a little evocative to rename it as the prayer to Prajnaparamita. They do talk a lot more about prayer in Tibetan Buddhism, but who knows what the Tibetan words are for whatever we think of as prayer. I don't know. I'm always a little cautious there. That we're in looking at things through the lens of our culture and language, at least my culture and language. But the funny thing, too, is that someone else just a couple days ago was also asking me about prayer and Zen, and I had a memory. I remembered one time, it was probably a while ago, I couldn't remember when Norman gave several Dharma talks talking about prayer, and some people in the Sangha were disturbed. And at least one of them, a very devoted member, came up to me a couple days later and said, "I don't get why Norman was talking about prayer. That's not right. That's not Zen." And we talked about it, and I don't know if we resolved anything for him, but then a couple days ago, I was poking around on my computer and I ran into some notes. I don't even know why I ran into them, from the year 2007, from those very talks. And here is Norman's prayer. This is Norman Fisher, by the way, our founding teacher. Here's a prayer from Norman. Please help me, Buddha. Give me strength to know myself, to understand and accept my limitations. Help me to be honest with myself and with others. Help me to see myself and others with a generous eye. Help me to forgive myself. Help me to forgive others. Open my heart. Bring me peace. Give me health and strength for the journey that I will need to sustain my life. Inspire me so that I might inspire others. And above all, help me to be grateful for my life, to love myself and others, and to do whatever I can every day, no matter how small it may be, to help. In the first line, please help me, Buddha, there is a little asterisk footnote. The footnote says, or help me Guanyin, help me Tara, help me Prajnaparamita, says that. Help me Avalokiteshvara, help me teachers. Help me sky, help me spirit. And here's the rest of it again. Help me, give me strength to know myself, to understand, accept my limitations. Help me to be honest with myself and with others. Help me to see myself and others with a generous eye. Help me to forgive myself. Help me to forgive others. Open my heart. Bring me peace. Give me health and strength for the journey, for what I need to sustain my life. Inspire me so that I might inspire others. And above all, help me to be grateful for my life, to love myself and others, and to do whatever I can every day, however small it may be, to help. Yeah, isn't that beautiful? Yeah. And this will be on the notes on the website and everything. You can get it. So I guess I have not been a big practitioner of prayer myself. I mean, I love the chanting we do, which is a kind of prayer, but I don't necessarily do this. I think I might take it up now. But I'm feeling like, in some mysterious way, the practice of prayer is a kind of bridge to help us sort of be simultaneously with these two paths that I'm suggesting of healing and transformation. I mean, it's kind of obvious in the path of healing, calling for help, right? Good idea. I need to heal. Please help me heal. But I think it's equally or maybe more important in the path of transformation. Lest we think that there's something that we can figure out and do and solve and fix and transform in ourselves. Best to call out to someone and not even know who we're calling out to. To open our hearts to something bigger than any idea we have of me or you or this or practice or Zen or anything. That is part of the path of transformation. Is opening our hearts bigger than any idea we might have about any of this. And it seems to me like what a great way to do that is to call out to a mythical being, You know what you're doing, which is great, which is really great. May it be so. So we have time to have a huddle. Let's have a huddle. Try for 3, and if you end up in a group of 4, that's okay, but look around the room for a pair first. See if you can finish a group of 3. And I think this time I won't ring the bell. We'll just be more informal and not timed. And but carefully taking turns, not just a chat. Taking turns so each person has the time to speak and be listened to and has space to do that in. And just reflect out loud about whatever you heard in this talk that seems helpful. I wonder if it would be useful to talk about how healing and transformation has played out in your life so far. I wonder if it would be helpful to think about prayer and devotion and the many different forms of practice. See what comes up. See what comes up. And listen to each other so that we can inspire each other. Okay? So find a group of 3. I'll go first. I don't know what I'm going to say, and see what comes out of your mouth. Okay? Go ahead. And yeah, let's stop the recording. Thanks, Ariel. If you're with the same old, you can also go across the